Hello and welcome to Miniature Realms. My name is Stuart and welcome to another painting tutorial, and we continue our focus on Warlord Games Epic Battles Waterloo campaign release and continue the range of painting tutorials that I'm doing for those at the moment. So today is the British Heavy Cavalry, and I realise Heavy Cavalry is a bit of a broad term. But rather than just focusing on one individual type of heavy cavalry, I thought we'd just kind of try and cover all bases. Now there are near 30 different types of troops available as part of this release, if you're including officers and things, and it's going to be near impossible for me to do a painting tutorial for each and every single type. So I thought what I'll do today is, while painting the heavy dragoons, the British ones, I would try and cover enough stuff that you could use the same methods to cover any of the models on the British heavy cavalry sprue or brigade box or part of your army box, depending on how you've purchased the miniatures. What you see in front of you here, see a nice little gap in the middle of this stand. I've already painted one stand worth of these. If you follow my vlogs on my own progress and my own project for this, you will have seen one. And there we have a British heavy dragoon there, and I've been painting them as the King's Dragoons, and there's a gap there ready for one to go on here. And I thought, because all of the British heavy cavalry on that sprue all wear red, so you have the heavy dragoons themselves, you have the household cavalry, which you've not got on the desk in front of me, as well as the Scots greys, and of course you also have the 9-pounder artillery as well. But again, I've already done those on another video. But in terms of cavalry, all three types that are available on this same box or sprue all have essentially very, very similar uniforms. So they have essentially red jackets, grey trousers, and then similar other equipment, whether that be the similar helmets on the dragoons and the household cavalry, or whether that's a very plain black busby, whether it's covered or not, on the Scots greys themselves. So there's a lot of things that, by doing separate tutorials, would be a little bit pointless really. We'd just be copying the same thing. So I thought the way I'd attack it would be to do a full tutorial using the heavy dragoons, and then also cover a little bit on the Scots greys. And you can see that this one here is almost entirely painted already. So the reason I'm going to cover the Scots greys is I've had a few requests, and a lot of them are going to be focused around on how you're going to go about painting the horses. So it also gives me then a chance to show you how I would go about painting a grey horse as part of the tutorial. So what we're going to do today, we're going to paint this one to completion, and this one we're going to finish off just by painting the horse. Now, I've prepared each miniature using a zenithal highlight. I'm not going to show you how to do that on this video. It's quite important to the processes that I'm using for these miniatures. I'm going to pop a little link in now, and that shows you my initial infantry tutorial, which actually shows you how I do a zenithal highlight. It's a black prime and then layers of white with an airbrush. Now, if you don't have an airbrush, I would suggest that you use a grey prime and then you dry brush white afterwards. I've dry brushed on these afterwards as well, just to pick out those sort of highlighted areas, and it really helps with the glazing process that I'm going to be using with contrast paints. Now you'll see that they look almost white, and it's quite a heavy zenithal. And zenithal is a single light source. It's probably not really the best way to describe what I'm doing with these miniatures, but it uses the same process. In many ways I've made them grayscale, so it's not just a pure white. I am leaving some black there as a bit of an undershadow, but it's quite a heavy zenithal. Anyway, let's get on to the painting. Now, I'm actually going to start with the Scots grey, mainly because we're only working on the horse here, and you'll see when I paint the dragoon how I've covered many of the other things on the miniature. As I said, they're very transferable. So I have painted absolutely everything else, with maybe a few little touches up to do. And the horse is the pure white there, or the white grey from the zenithal that I did as part of the preparation. And because I knew the horse was going to be a grey, I made sure that there was a good amount of white paint on it, maybe more than I would if I was doing a brown or something like that. I've already painted in all of the straps, the saddle, even the black on the hooves. It really is just the grey of the horse hair and the horse body, head, flesh, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to start with Apothecary White. Now I've given it a bit of shake. It separates quite a lot if you haven't used this stuff before, but what this is essentially a grey glaze or wash really. So I'm to be very careful, and I want to cover all the white areas of the horse, including the mane and the tail, and I'm going to be a little bit thicker on the mane and the tail. And what this will do is shade your white area with grey, rather than starting with a grey and working up. Now, as you know, there's already a little bit of grey scaling in there from the zenithal preparation I did, so this will just double down on it. But if you had it too grey, you wouldn't get enough transition from the contrast paint. It'd still work, but you'd end up having to do a lot more with the highlighting afterwards. Now I've placed the Scots Grey to one side, and I'm going to have to let that contrast dry completely before I can do the next stages, which is basically highlighting the white and adding some grey markings on there. So we can go what is more like a traditional painting tutorial now into the completely unpainted miniature. And I'm going to start with a horse on this one. Now you can obviously paint your horses lots of different colours. Again, I'm going to start with contrast, and I'm going to use contrast Sigil brown. Now this is a very heavy pigmented contrast paint, and if you apply it neat, you may well not see much of the colour underneath coming through at all, and you do want that to come through, otherwise you're just essentially painting with a normal paint. So I tend to thin Sigil brown at least by a third. So this is 2 parts Sigil brown and 1 part water, and I use water more than I do medium for contrast paints. I find it works absolutely fine. So that's the base layer of the horse down. I am now going to start applying the rest of the colour to the miniature stage by stage. So we've got contrast Blood Angels Red, which I've been using standard for all the British uniforms. It's a lovely, lovely rich red. Highlights very well with other colours afterwards. But the colour you're left with just from basic coverage over zenithal is pretty pleasing. So that's all the red areas on there. So you've got your jacket, you've got some of the accoutrements there as well, and you'll notice I've really tried quite hard to only place the red where it's supposed to go, and that's because it really helps with the later stages in terms of using the contrast over the lighter colour rather than having to paint it over a darker one. If I make too much of a big mistake, I'll generally go back and correct it with a little bit of white or a little bit of grey in order to carry on. So the next stage is going to be the rider's trousers, and for that I'm going to be using contrast Basilicanium Grey. Now this is, I believe, the officer or at least the trumpeter, I suppose. I think officer, and the rest of the unit actually has a stripe down the side of the trousers which is red. It is raised on the miniature, and I just painted that in red the same as I had before, but this one's actually a little bit simpler. Now there's a couple of parts on this model where it differs slightly to the standard troopers. The troopers have a little turn back on their trousers, and they also have a carbine. Now I'll be using contrast Gore Grunter fur on those. Unfortunately, in order to demonstrate, it's not needed on the model, but I thought I'd at least point that out. If you follow the other tutorials, the Gore Grunter fur I've been using for all the rifles wood anyway and things. So we next have the saddle cloth and the sabre tash, and it depends what you want to do really. These, I've painted the cuffs and the hands as gloves with sort of longer gloves. It's the same as the studio paint job. For the Scots Greys, I've actually painted the cuff area in the regimental colour, And the more colour plates I found showed them that way, even though the studio paint job has painted them as part of the glove. I suppose you can do what you like. You can see here that it works in both ways, but I'll be leaving the white on my Dragoons, and as I said, I've painted them on the Scots greys. Now, so I'm going to be using Contrast Ultramarines blue, and because I'm not doing the cuffs, like I said, it's the saddlecloth, the sabretache, and the collar of the miniature up there. So that's the blue on. Now you'll notice that I've left a gap just around the trim of the saddlecloth and the sabretache. Now that's for some edging that's just obviously relevant to the regiment that I'm doing. This is where the tutorials, either fit or don't fit depending on what you're painting, so you can just get the idea of what I'm doing now. I mostly left them in. I did touch them up with a little bit of grey paint afterwards. You may find it easy just to paint the whole thing blue and then paint over the top with the relevant colour. May depend on what the colour is. And I'm also using a mix of things. So I had a really interesting chat with someone in the comments the other day talking about what was yellow lace or gold, whether it's gold lace and whether it's fabric or piping, and it's very hard to tell, especially with a lot of colour plates. And from my Dragoons, I'm putting all yellow edging around here, but on the epaulets I'm actually using gold. Now you could use yellow instead of gold on all of the miniature, especially at this scale. I'm choosing to do a little bit of mix of both. Do whatever you prefer, really. There are a few yellow places on this miniature. So we've got the sash, we have the front of the jacket here, either side of the sort of cross strap, the edging around here, and then you can choose on the edge here. I've done in gold for the rest of them, so I will be using gold, but you could easily do that yellow as well. And so the yellow I'm going to be using is the second to highest in the range in terms of brightness for contrast, and that's the Nazdrag. It's quite a warm ochre yellow. But when it goes over a very light colour like this, kind of almost whitish colour, you get quite a nice rich yellow, which you can then highlight upon afterwards. There we go. So whilst all the base layer of blue on, I've actually added a little bit of red to the plume at the top. So the officers has a red little plume there, where all the troopers are all black, the same colour as the main. So I'm going to do the officer's face now. So it's Guilliman flesh again. Contrast is pretty much all contrast until we get to metallics. For the basic layer, and then the optional highlighting on top. Now there's only a little bit of hair showing on the rider himself, so I'm going to make him blonde, because I'm going to go Yamden yellow, which is brighter than the previous yellow we used, and hopefully it will really make it stand out from the rest of it. And there will be some gold on the helmet itself, so I don't want it to be blending in with that. That's why I've gone for the much lighter yellow than the one I've used on the trim and the sash. So we're at a stage now where we're going to do a large amount of one colour on the miniature, and that's going to be black. So we've got the mane, the tail, the hooves, the rider's boots, much of the helmet. In fact, I'll probably paint it all in black, ready to go over in metallic afterwards. That's got your mane in there, and obviously all of the horse's accoutrements and stuff as well, and the saddle and the scabbard. Pretty much everything's going to be black. That's remaining white on the miniature now. So from that, we're going to use Contrast Black Templar. It's pretty versatile, so on the larger areas like the mane and things, it will give you some natural highlight, and then the thinner areas, it's dark enough to sort of work as a black in itself. So that's the black on. Let's do the tiny little bit of metallics that are on this, and then we've finished the sort of basic base layer. I'm going to use some scale colour, so scale 75 black metal, and that's perfect for the blade. Then I'm going to use, again, scale 75, I'm going to use Necro Gold, and that's going to go in a number of places. So on the edge here, on the scabbard, and then there's some areas on the helmet as well. Right, now we've reached the point on the miniature where it's perfectly reasonable to leave it at that. There's a base layer on every single part of the miniature over the kind of grayscale zenithal, if you like, pre-highlight, which is given a little bit more depth than you would do just over a flat colour. And with hundreds and hundreds of these on the table, that would be absolutely fine. But I don't like to do that. I want to tart them up a little bit more and actually build some contrast in the colour, if you excuse the use of the term, and it's not be confusing when I'm using contrast paints. And I'm going to go along and pretty much highlight every single part of the miniature now. It will just make it look a lot tidier and really make it pop. So as we head to the highlighting stages, we can welcome back the Scots Grey, and we're going to work obviously just on the horse, because that's the only thing left to do. And you can see that the Apothecary White has kind of given us a bit of a dull grey shade. I'm going to highlight now with model colour Off-White. Now the goal isn't to cover the whole thing in white again, because that would undo all the work we've done. It's just pick out some of the top areas with a little bit of white to give it a bit of a highlight. I'm going to be leaving the mane and the tail as they are, so I want them to look a little bit darker and contrast slightly from the main area of the horse. Now back to the Dragoon, and we're going to start highlighting his horse now, and we're going to be using model colour Wood Grain. This is quite a thin paint. The pigment's fairly thin, so it does give you quite a light coat, but I find that it works really well with the Cygor brown, just as a really subtle highlight. And I don't want to overly highlight these horses. I want the eye to be drawn to the colour of the jacket, and the other parts of the rider more. Horses are hard to paint, hard to draw, and I get horses wrong quite a lot, and I think one of the problems I find is that I maybe over highlight them, and there's so much muscle structure. It'll be the same as painting a miniature with that's bare chested or something like that. It's quite hard to get a really nice smooth finish and get a finish that looks realistic. And I think if I analyse painting horses, sometimes I can say over highlight them to try and pick out the musculature, and it doesn't look natural enough. So by going a little bit less but making sure the rest of the model is right, it's more than enough, again, especially on this scale. Now using graphene grey from Scale Colour from Scale 75, I'm going to just put some highlights on some of the black areas. So mainly we're talking just at the top of the scabbard, and pick out some little parts on the horse's bridle, etc., and reins, and a little bit on the plume and the tail and the mane, not too much. And now we're back with our Scots Grey, and the white is dried. So as you can see, I've just slightly highlighted the after the Apothecary White wash, just sort of tidies up a little bit, brings a little bit of lightness to the top areas of the horse. Now, again, you really don't have to add this, but I'm going to use Scale Colour graphite, and just add in very few little speckles and dots and things. Now, apart from a little tidy up, that's him done now. We'll come back to him at the end. Back with the Dragoon, and we're going to just work on the saddle blanket and the sabretache and the other little bits of blue that are there. We're going to use two colours to highlight, both of them scale colour fantasy games, the Scale 75 fantasy games. We've got the Amath blue, which is the top highlight, and we have the Anaradhod or something like that. It's an awful pronunciation. Someone's already helped me with that in a comment and I've completely forgotten it, but SFG 29, let's be safe. I'm going to use both of those two. Really simple. So you've got a first layer, you're just filling in and just brightening the center of the colored area, and then having already prepared the other side, the lighter color, I'm just going to add in a little faint line just to really bring it up. So next colour, scale colour again, Scale 75, graphite, and then just lightly pack out the trousers a little bit, just give it a little bit of a highlight. Next on, we're going on to the red, and this is the stuff that really starts to brighten it up. So layer Evil Sun Scarlet from Citadel, and it's a really nice highlight for this, the Blood Angels contrast when it's done over a grayscale or zenithal pre-highlights. You can see it just really makes it pop there. It really just starts to make the miniature stand out in a big way. So we're now moving on to the yellow areas, and for that I'm going to use flat yellow for model colour. Yellow isn't the easiest paint to paint sometimes. I usually find Citadel ones very good, and I don't actually have any at the moment, but this has been working fine as a bit of a highlight over the contrast kind of base I've been using. You can add a very minor highlight to the nose and cheeks, and for that I'm going to be using Fairy Flesh Noctura. It's Vallejo range. Just going to go back and touch up the white with a little bit of model colour off-white, as you've seen before in the video. Now the next stage is highlighting the sword. I'm just going to use this Game Air Silver for that. And now highlighting the gold areas, and back to Scale 75, and this is their Elven Gold. Now the final thing I do is a little bit of black lining and a little bit of adding a bit of detail over the markings on the jacket, and there's black lines in the cummerbund, that kind of thing. And I've just been using contrast black Templar for that. It's quite easy to control versus a standard black paint. If you were going to use a standard black paint, I'll probably recommend something like Game Air Black. Again, because it's quite thin, but it dries quite smoothly. It's quite good control to it. I'm not going to go around everywhere and black line on these miniatures because they're too small and it's adding lots of extra time, but there's just certain areas that really benefit from it. And there we are. And that's enough. This is one of going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cavalrymen in an army. It's time to stick him on the base and show it what it looks like when it's all done. So the Dragoon's away on his base with his friends, waiting for the earth texture to dry. And again, I won't take you through the basing in this tutorial. If you'd like to see what I'm doing for this army, I'll pop a little link in now, which is for the part 2 of the infantry tutorial I do for the British. It's very, very simple, but some people like to know what I'm using. So here's the Scots Grey. He's the only one I've painted. I hope you forgive me for not doing a separate tutorial for him, but those are for the reasons I mentioned at the start of the video. And I'm sure you can see that so much of it is painted in the same way as the Dragoon, and the same would be for the Household Cavalry as well, which are just another flavour of Dragoons anyway, as far as I'm aware. So it really wanted to just show an alternative horse and also tick the box of the Scots Greys. It's no masterpiece, as you can see. It's a very, very simple process using Apothecary White. We're just adding a few little dots of grey and white on at the end. They're probably a little bit too uniform, but again, for the number that are going to be on the table, and from the distance you're looking at for a miniature that's smaller than 15mm, I think that can be forgiven. Hopefully some of you have taken something away from it. And there we are. There's the finished Dragoons, with him placed in the middle in the nice little gap there. And I think they look really nice as a little base, and they don't take ridiculously long to paint. You could definitely paint them an awful lot quicker, but I think the method strikes a balance somewhere between kind of just doing sort of flat colours and not picking out all the detail, and sort of spending hours and hours and hours doing some really, really high sort of detailed stuff. Like I said, part way through the video, you can stop at the contrast stage. You don't have to continue with the extra highlights. You could easily go back into a further highlight and everything, which I would do in a larger scale, and definitely wouldn't leave them as they are now. Each place would probably have a further highlight, especially the red and the grey, and then on the horses and things. But I think it came out okay. You see a couple of different shades of brown there. There's no kind of one solid method that I use for the horses, other than, like I said earlier, is try not to be too stark with the highlight, and it seems to just do a subtleish job on them, and then your eyes are drawn to the lovely red jackets and the gold trim and things anyway. So there's the stand I've already done. If those of you who follow my vlog series will have already seen that already, but I think they look pretty good. It's sort of 2, 3 or 4 stands for the unit sizes if you're using the black powder, but you know, you do whatever you like on there. You may have noticed, not sure if I mentioned it earlier on, that these bases looked slightly larger than the ones supplied by Warlord Games. Quite a few people on the internet groups, namely the Warlord Games Epic Battles Waterloo one that I set up with Ken for Miniature Wargaming Warriors channel. I'll try to remember to put a link in the show notes. It's a really good place to chat about Epic Battles Waterloo if you're interested about that on Facebook, and it's very, very friendly. Some of the other Napoleonic groups, as fantastic as they are, aren't always very receptive to Warlord Games or to Epic Battles stuff. But yeah, so the people on there, there's been lots of chatter about it. It's a really positive thing, and one of the things that quite a lot of the players have done is use slightly deeper bases, because the 60 by 20 millimeter bases, the horses do stick off each side slightly, and you may well end up handling them. So these are still 60 millimeter wide. I picked these up from Renedra. The plastic ones, you can get them from war bases as well. I think they work out exactly the same price. So I'm using plastic. I've ordered some of each, but I'm using plastic because I just like plastic bases, and they're 30 mils deep, so just that little bit deeper. And in black powder, depth doesn't really matter. It's the frontages you're after anyway. I just think they look a little bit nicer. But anyway, so thanks very much for watching the video. I hope you, like I said earlier, hope you forgive me kind of squeezing in the one Scots Grey and maybe focusing on the horse, and I hope you also agree that so much of the painting of the miniature is exactly the same. It would seem a little bit pointless in some ways to have 2 separate videos, and apologising for missing off the Household Cavalry completely, and they're so similar to these Dragoon models that it's, yeah, it just feels like that. Feels like it would be too much repetition when I could be painting French Dragoons or something like that, which may well be coming soon. So do forgive me, but thanks very much for watching. Do check out the other links that I've put up during the show that show how to do the Zenithal Prime stage and show how I do my basing if it's interesting. If you found this video before you found anything else on my channel, there's lots of epic battles stuff, being that ACW and lots of Napoleonic at the moment. There are some other things on the channel as well, some bolt action, some 10 mil Wars of the Roses, and a bit of Lord of the Rings stuff. So I do whatever tends to take my fancy, but it's very, very heavily focused on my favourite two periods, historical periods, which are American Civil War and the Napoleonic period. So thanks very much for watching. Consider giving us a like and subscribing to the channel, and I will catch you soon.